Definitely.
How then do we do it? How do we translate these great words and those great priorities into actual actions by Auckland Transport?
So I think it is a political question, and I think throughout the next 2 months writing of the plan to show the actions, but it will take all of us individually and as a group to be harder, be stronger, make the hard and tough decisions with our CCOs and with departments across council, or we need to be honest with the public that we will not reach targets or we will not have action on climate change. So I do personally have a concern, if you're asking for a political answer, that we aren't doing that in a lot of areas. We are in a lot of areas, but we will need to all act and all be honest about where we're moving and where we're not moving. So thank you, Councillor Casey, but I think it's a question for all of us, not just me. So thank you. Councillor Bartley, question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, thank you for all your work on this. I wanted to ask about the consultation and whether there was feedback from or submissions from the big players out there, the ones that we are going to need to partner with. Is there buy-in from them in terms of this plan, like central government, industry, agricultural sector? Did they submit and have they bought into this plan in order for us to facilitate partnership, which is what the public have said they wanted us to play? Because I'm really concerned about the plan being seen as just council's plan when it should be seen as Auckland's plan. And the only way we're going to achieve real change is if all those big players buy into this plan and pay for it as well as us.
Kia ora, Councillor. I guess to answer that, yes, so specifically on the consultation, we had about 80 plus organisational responses, including some large industry, energy providers, groups like New Zealand Green Building Council, Forest and Bird, and others. The other thing to make note of, and it was that funnel diagram which Sarah highlighted, way back when we started this process, we convened a number of subject matter expert workshops, which actually led to the generation of the initial actions, and that included businesses, civil society, the likes of WWF and others in that room. So when we talk about the buy-in through that phase, yes, through that process, if I'm honest, our focus in the last few months has been processing feedback and getting to this point. So now there is another need to go further out again and re-engage with those broader communities. The other thing I'd say, just in terms of business, is we are part of a Climate Leaders Coalition. There's 100-ish large and small businesses who have signed up to a similar target to what we've committed to, a 1.5 degree halving our emissions target. And that includes the Z Energies, the Fonterras, the Fletchers, those large organisations. So if anything, from a business sense, we're probably catching up to them.
Great question. Councillor Cooper?
Thank you. And I apologise first because you were talking about the water before, but I kind of zoned out. My issue is talking about in the adaptation space around things like extra water capacity for rural. You know, we've gone through a big issue, and so does that sit in? Will those show the actions? And you've also got the dynamic adaptive policies, because we'll have to change a lot of policies to allow a lot of the things we need to do. I'm just sort of saying, where does things like increasing water capacity or potable water resilience come in? I see built environment. I see the policy pathways. Natural environment. If it's not water in the key moves, yep, or whatever we're calling them now, priority actions, where would it sit?
Through the chair. So that is a clear focus within the actions. To reassure you of that, there isn't a water priority, as has been noted. Within the built environment priority, there is a clear action focused on water supply and understanding water supply, both from the context of population growth and also projected climate change impacts. So that is something we've been working closely with Watercare on.
Sorry, just mindful of that, because that's at the moment we've got 50,000 homes who aren't Watercare customers, and that's where I'm looking at that other focus as well. So Watercare won't be doing that. It's about what we can do as a council in terms of policy and regulation. Hope that's picked up. It's not everybody's a Watercare customer.
Yeah.
There's about 10% of our population that isn't, or housing.
Through the chair. There is a sub-theme that also goes right the way through the adaptation side, which is about the natural hazards. And that's where we will pick up a lot of those resilience pieces. We'll pick up the resilience in the climate and community, in the community piece, but we'll also be driving it right the way through, because natural hazards is how we're going to see the effects of climate change as it comes through. So it is an underlying theme for everything we're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I wanted to just know where it's at, because it is about resilience and adaptation and a whole lot of other issues. So that's good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Chair. And just before my question, there was a political question there. Brief political responses. It's going to be up to us to back up. And for 2 years, Auckland Transport has been telling us that it has got a very lean operational budget. It's down to zilch. So we're going to have to make some decisions. We're going to have to give them the direction as to what stops or slows down and what accelerates. It's as simple as that. So future decisions for us to make and take responsibility for. My question, in the early discussion, there was some mention of a climate advisory panel. And recently I've discussed with the chair and the deputy about the possibility of establishing something that I was terming, discussed with the Mayor, about an Auckland Futures Forum. And it's probably, I'm thinking of it on the back of the success of the Mayoral Housing Task Force, which sort of started out as the Housing Summit, as I termed it, and it became a very successful entity with 33 really clear recommendations that were built out of not just the council, but they were built out of the reach into the private sector, NGOs, etc. Is there the potential to actually, as we progress this work, which is not just Auckland Council work and will not go anywhere if it's just an Auckland Council organisational response, is there merit in establishing an entity which is quite a bit more than your climate advisory panel, that actually maybe uses the model of the Mayoral Housing Task Force, I'm loosely calling it the Auckland Futures Forum, with climate change as its core, to try and get some advice from the private sector or the all Auckland sector into us to guide our response and our future decision making?
Kia ora, Councillor. I guess short answer is yes, of course. The independent advisory group was set up largely to check and challenge the work that we were doing in preparation for this climate plan, make sure the science was robust. So it is largely academic. We are now talking to them about the role that they play going through implementation of the specific plan. But short answer is, of course, if we see value in that group plus others, because obviously there's a broader view that you're looking for, then yeah, we can have that discussion, no doubt.
Where do we have that discussion? Sorry, I don't want to leave it there.
Where?
Yeah, where and when do we have that discussion?
Councillor Hills and Councillor Coombe are meeting with the chair and deputy of that independent advisory group next week. I think we've teed something up, so we can start the conversation there at least.
About the potential to grow it out from that?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Darby. Councillor Henderson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. 2 questions. So I'll be watching over the decades as the law gets settled around climate refugees. This will be potentially a massive challenge for us, where if we're looking at a 3.5 scenario, there will be entire nations that will go underwater, and those people will need somewhere to go. So in relation to this plan, and particularly the built environment transport planning space, does this plan sufficiently cover planning challenges that could come from a potentially large influx of climate refugees in a short amount of time?
Short answer is yes, that sits as one of the actions, and apologies again, we're getting into some of the detail that we haven't had time to bring to you. But there is a specific work around modelling what does that look like, what are we looking at and how do we respond to that? Obviously feeding into our growth and infrastructure strategy team, our spatial, how and where do we grow? So short answer is yes, the plan has got work in there, but again, we'll bring that to April.
Thank you. Second question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. How does this apply to events, and I'm not naming any particular events, where people are given plastic bottles? Hundreds of them, thousands of them. Will this now be frowned upon as per our plan?
I guess there's a few things. One is in terms of work that we're doing with our council-controlled organisations, so where we have direct control, and we have a group of sustainability managers across council, and our impact or the work that we do as an organisation is critical to that. So where we run those events and how we run them in a way that is zero waste and low emissions is key. The second bit is about how we influence others, which kind of, I think, talks to Councillor Bartley's point about who else is on the board or who else needs to be here to drive that, appreciating that some of those events aren't necessarily council events, but we need to do that.
Yes, and Councillor Simpson and I are asking many questions about that currently, and we're waiting on another answer. But that may be also a question for the Ports of Auckland, who were, when we meet with them on the CCO discussion, as it was, they were the lead on that event, and yes. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I just want to start by saying congratulations. This is fantastic work. And I think before I ask my two short questions, just to note the 3,000 respondents, you sort of say X number of, but to just put it into context, remember we only had 500 on the City Centre Master Plan refresh, and to date we've only had about 1,800 on our annual budget, so it is actually quite significant. And I'm very pleased to note that, of course, Ōrākei is one of the top 5 respondents, so that's very good. But my question is, why did we get nothing from Great Barrier? None of those 5 questions had any response from Great Barrier. Why was that? Do you know? I mean, they're really good on this sort of stuff usually, but it was 0, 0, 0, 0 all the way through.
Through the chair, to be honest, can't answer that question. It was something through the public perception survey. We ensured that we did go out and get representation from all of the local boards. From the consultation responses, we just don't know the answer, to be honest.
No, I just unusual. Everybody else had some sort of percentage and some sort of people feedback. They got
Absolutely.
one person that sort of said no, and all of a sudden, Okay, and my question just on the resolution to you, Mr. Chair, just on introducing an overarching, should that be Tamaki Makaurau response? Why are we just saying Tamaki response?
Yeah.
Tamaki is my good learned colleague, neighbour, Councillor Bartley's area, and if we're just talking about her, fine, but we're not, are we? Oh.
That's that's good. That's good feedback, and we can discuss
Please,
that.
could you just, if the mover and the seconder are in agreement, I think if you're going to use Tamaki, you should use the correct term. Thank you.
Yep, I'm happy with that, but we can discuss that during the debate if there is any concern around that. So, thank you. Good point. Sorry, Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the officers, but I was really intrigued and challenged by the question that was put to you by Councillor Casey. And I want to support what she is highlighting, and that is, how do we take this out of the political domain? I don't see this as necessarily needing to become political questions if we, while we're setting the framework, actually ensure that there is adequate monitoring between what we say and what we do, and that there is transparency around that. And if we were to require more formalisation of that, what might that look like, Alex or Sarah? How can we do this? This is an issue that must not be politicised. This has to be something that we all get together and do in the most apolitical way. So I feel it's beholden on us to try, while we're looking at the framework, to say these are the mechanisms that we will use for regular evaluation. We will monitor this, we will report this. Did you consider that in terms of the report today? If not, are there things that we should add at this point?
Kia ora, Councillor. And I guess, I don't actually, I saw the political part of Councillor Casey's question, but actually, organisationally, so those of you know, I kind of come to this seat fairly recently, but the scale of change within the organisation about how we're thinking about climate has shifted quite remarkably from my perspective. You know, if we are real and honest, climate change was always something that was there, that we talked about, but we didn't necessarily act on. Over the last 6 to 9 months, I've seen that change within the decisions, within the exposure that the ELT have given in council, within that sustainability, that group of managers that I work with across the CCOs. That's not to say it's going to be easy. And I think, as has been alluded to, this is difficult. And the scale of the change that we're talking about is in that radical area. And that takes, granted we don't have a lot of time, that takes some time to get through. But there is the will, and there's definitely work going on about how Auckland Council responds. Part of that you'll see through the long-term plan. So where and how do we make sure that there is budget to deliver on Council's contribution to this plan? Recognising, as well was alluded to, this is a broad plan for the region. So I guess hopefully I can give you comfort that there is change going on in terms of how we reflect it. I think we need to push harder, and that's kind of my role in this seat, is to challenge the organisation as well, to go, hang on, you know, this is how we've done things before, but that's in a world where we haven't had to think about climate change in the way that we do now. And actually the way we do things might need to be quite different. So if I can give you that comfort, I suppose, that things are moving, we always do need that political push to make sure that actually we're responding in the right way. But this is quite big change for the organisation and other organisations in the region.
I accept that, but I guess in an organisational sense, you know, we sitting around the table here with the Independent Maori Statutory Board and the elected members have a governance role, and I think it's a failure in terms of the proposal that we're not actually factoring in the monitoring and specifying the reporting to the degree that will ensure that we do go beyond rhetoric and depoliticise this, so we're dealing with facts. We're not just dealing with feel good. So I'd like a more detailed response from you on what might improve this to take into account what I would like to see.
Apologies, I missed that bit. So the monitoring and the target setting is a key part of the plan. It will come through in April in terms of actually what are the targets that we're aiming for at a regional level, but also at an Auckland Council level. And so that I think in one of the slides earlier, you know, highlighted that monitoring and target setting is actually part of the plan. So apologies if I missed that question.
Well, I'll look forward to that in April in terms of seeing the specifics that you are putting to us to how this will be reported in the most appropriate way.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. And I do take what Councillor Fletcher and somewhat of what Councillor Darby's saying too. Is it an independent kind of monitoring, or is it how are we reporting? I think I'm not putting words in your mouth, Councillor Fletcher, but you know, how do we ensure that it's not politicised, that it's sitting?
So those of us who were involved in setting up the state of the environment for the Hauraki Gulf and those sorts of things, we wanted to be able to deal with facts on a regular basis. Probably we don't deal with them often enough, but just to make sure we've got our equivalent of that coming back here.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. Councillor Newman.
Good morning. Resume my right to speak. I just wanted to, and you've talked about you're starting work now in terms of really fleshing out what radical change and what people's understanding of what radical change will mean. But just in terms of the initial consultation, what was the understanding of the respondents at the time as to what the radical change was that they were making to their lives, that they were agreeing to?
Through the chair, through today's consultation, it's a 20-minute survey with quite a lot of questions to get through. So actually for the questions on radical change, it was a scale. So a scale was given of 1 to 10 with groupings, whether it was moderate change, low change or radical change, and people were grouped in that way.
were the respondents given any direction as to what the low, moderate, and radical would actually be? I mean, some of this is quite binary. For example, with those who were agreeing to the radical change, understanding that, well, radical change will involve them giving up their car and doing mode shift where they're relying wholly or overwhelmingly on public transport from now on. Are people aware of that? Radical change could be, well, actually people will shift from their outer suburban home on the section and they'll move to an apartment. Were they aware of that when they agreed to it?
I think short answer is no. We didn't provide that kind of what does radical mean, and that is, as kind of Sarah alluded to in the slides, that is a limitation to that survey.
So you've talked about that you're now going to be interrogating this question in more detail and really driving into the specifics as to, okay, I agree or I have agreed to radical change. Now I'm going to apply that radical change to my life, and this is what it will mean. So when will we know more about what that actually means, the practical implications, thank you, and people's willingness to actually make those changes? Because I think that there is a difference between people's willingness to rate themselves a 6 and 7 on a scale and to go and give up the car and catch the bus and move to an apartment.
Through the chair, we are looking at a communications campaign kicking off from around mid-year onwards leading up to LTP, where we will be talking to Aucklanders a lot more about what radical change looks like, what the kind of actions are needed to actually deliver our climate goals. So there'll be a whole range of communications going out from mid-year through to the LTP consultation, so that Aucklanders are more able to understand some of the questions coming through with regards to LTP as well.
Reserve my right to speak to you.
Thank you, Member. Councillor, Member Karen Wilson.
Thank you. I absolutely agree. I'm going to file all those questions that have already been asked by way of the councillors, because clearly we are interested. All I'm going to concentrate on, which will be short and sharp, is around wording. And so I heard the word partnership being used, and implicit or evident in the documentation is the treaty. So are you using those in the right ways when you're talking? I would hazard a guess that some of them are relationships as opposed to partnerships that you're speaking to. That will make a huge difference. And then the kōrero around, as we were getting into more detail around the priorities, I can't recall specifically, and the comment was made around Māori, that will remain. Don't worry about it too much, that will remain. That should never be any kōrero that should be expressed by your staff in terms of the significance of Māori, given the name of the framework. So it's just making sure in terms of the consultation, and I expressed that in the workshop that was held at the same time, there was a difference between activations, which wasn't necessarily a survey, and yet the response rate is quite high. So again, I emphasise my concern around the difference between an activation, I'm talking about Māori, I can't speak on behalf of anything, and consultation. So getting that wording absolutely correct would be fine. And then in terms of the MIS, the Māori Impact Statement, included in there is other ethnicities, which isn't the intention of a Māori Impact Statement, as you're aware. Thank you.
Thanks, Member Wilson, and I think we take all that on board, and we'll obviously make sure we improve on that.
Thank you, Member Wilson. Councillor Walker, and then lastly we've got
Sure, and of course I reserve my right to speak as well. So I have a question around leadership and advocacy. Are we going to be having a section in our plan around that? I'm thinking particularly, and you might go to this, around our membership of groups like C40, ICLEI, our relationship with other cities in Australasia, Oceania, picking up on Councillor Henderson, our relationship with Pacific Island nations, because we need to be providing a lead there and could well be accepting climate refugees, and I would suggest will be into the future. And I guess part of what goes to that also, and I'd ask this by way of question, is linking with programs across resilient cities. Other cities are part of that. And what follows also around this is benchmarking with other cities across our aspirations, goals, and targets.
So short answer is yes, there will be a leadership and governance type section and talk about the commitments that we have made, the groups that we are involved in, and what might we need to do as well.
Will that also cover off groups that we might not be involved with but should be, so that we're applying a lateral approach?
We can definitely bring that to April.
Thank you, and Deputy Mayor, Councillor Cashmore.
Thanks very much, team. This is, it's not easy stuff, and it's challenging for everyone in the community. I think Councillor Newman brings up a point. The realities may bring forward some really stark choices for people, and we've got to be brave about how we challenge those. One of the questions I've got, Alec, for the team is the start and finish points for the measurements that you're going to bring forward to some actions. Where are those actions? What is the start measurement for the start point and where you want to get to? And I'll give you an equation, and you know about this, Alec. It's about agriculture. So we're the lowest carbon footprint of any nation in the world for agricultural production. And if we're going to knock agriculture around by making them reduce carbon footprints to an even greater extent, given the fact that they're lower than anyone else internationally, and we reduce food production, we then have to import food from nations that have exponentially higher carbon footprints. So the challenges around how are you going to measure those quotas? The start point and the end point are going to be very, very important where you put them on a sliding scale for the actual realities.
I think you make a great point, and we'll kind of factor that into the target setting. The other point I think that you made through that is the complexity of the system that we live in. And that's something that we need to address, and we talked about systemic change, making sure that some of the actions that we take don't actually have perverse outcomes. So, for example, a similar example is in terms of steel manufacturing. If we don't address the way that we're using steel, then we're still going to import steel, and therefore we might actually have a higher footprint. So those complexities are really tough to work through, but we need to make sure that we're actually delivering an actual response to this issue.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we've ended questions there. So now we move to the debate. I will just, I'll speak at the end, but I'll just quickly give you just another rundown of the changes because they are different to the agenda. So on my discussions with the IMSB, very good points were brought forward around the Tamaki Makaurau approach. As an overarching goal. That was the intent, but I think it's important to have it sitting there above the other two actions, which will feed back through that. So that's the change. There's also a change ensuring that mana whenua are continued to provide direction of the next 2 months while the document is being written up and ensuring they're very aware and feed into the changes. The B is seek direction from mana whenua on the naming process of Te Tarukia Tāwhiri. So my personal view was that this was the name for 18 months. I'm just, and the IMSB are just wanting to ensure that we have followed the correct process around gifting taonga like a name like this as part of this and ensuring that it's still the approach if this will stay. Or if there's another Māori name that mana whenua would prefer, or that this is fine, but we just want to have the flexibility in these resolutions to ensure that that is the correct way and we're not using a name that may or may not be the perfect way. And if I haven't got that right, please correct me, but I feel, yeah. So they are important changes, but don't necessarily change the integrity of or the discussion of the original document, but we just want, I feel they're important. So you're welcome to debate or vote whatever on those, but I and the Deputy Chair feel confident that those are important parts of the plan. So now on to speaking turns. Councillor Newman.
No need to apologise. Okay, well, thanks very much. I think this is very good work, and I think this is interesting grist for future conversations. I'm trying to work out if I'm a radical or if I'm a conservative, because I think to a certain extent I'm a radical. For example, I would want to treat and reuse wastewater to ensure security of supply in the future, and I think that would make a good contribution. I'm up for voting to downzone future urban zone land because I actually think we need to stop with all of the destructive gobbling up of land for greenfields suburban development. I'm for downzoning coastal land because I think that actually we need to, in the face of changing weather patterns, we need to get realistic about what we cannot do in relation to those coastal zones, areas subject to inundation. I'm for supporting future carbon sinks within watersheds so that now unproductive rural land, we can actually do something useful with it and create carbon sinks. And I'm for a focus on public transport based on actually contracting new services to outer suburban communities, not just what we currently do, which I think is a bit boutique, which is worrying about subsidies for existing PT users, the lucky few in the inner suburbs who have public transport. We talk about our concern about what bus drivers get paid, but actually the real focus in public transport needs to be about contracting services for communities that don't currently have it. That would be a real contribution to public transport. But the conservative part of me says, well, actually, I want to get Mill Road done. And I can tell you hand on heart that I will not be moving to an apartment. I'll be continuing to live in my outer suburban home. And I will be driving my car. I will be making some changes that sort of put me in the moderate category, like I'm happy to improve insulation. I will be addressing all future water leaks. And I'm happy to plant some trees. So I'm trying to quite work out where I am. But in reality, what I'm really concerned about is this. We all have a framework here which talks about the need to get radical, but when push comes to shove, we don't really. Our inclination is not, well, the budget's constrained, it's really hard to change the unitary plan. It's just all just seems so hard. So we'll kind of talk about it, but the further we push down the road, the sort of channeled response gets tighter and tighter. And in the end, it really doesn't look that radical. So I want to thank you for this because the reality is, and it has been foreshadowed by others, that when it comes to choices in the future, some of the choices that we make aren't that radical. And we kind of like talk like we're rather woke about the needs of the poor and that, but when it comes to it, we're not actually making the changes that provide those people with more choice. I would hope that you would support me so that we can help to make some of those difficult choices, because those poor people who live in outer suburban Auckland who have the least choice are the ones who need to be supported the most so that they can make the change and adapt to what I think will be necessary change in the not too distant future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. Oh, how do I? Councillor Walker.
I'm entirely supportive of this process, and I'm mindful that the team assembled here need to equip themselves so that we've got adequate budgeting and resourcing for the long-term plan. I guess what I'm particularly mindful of, and I see it on a day-by-day and a week-by-week basis, is that our decisions and our response don't reflect our talk. So I'll give you a few examples. So yesterday, I think it was yesterday, we had the issue around a marina strategy. Fundamentally, people in the community coming to us because we're looking to flog off, that is, sell, critical waterfront land that is on the front end of sea level rise that goes to adaptation, and it's the land that we need for our ferry services into the future and connectivity, and where people, iwi and New Zealanders generally want to access the water. So that's this week. And that particular issue has not been advanced since the resolution in March last year, a whole year. On Monday, I think it was, I attended a structure plan workshop for Dairy Flat and Silverdale. Huge area. Not one mention around climate change. So I brought a whole range of things to the attention of the planners around there and said this stuff really needs to be being considered at base one, not until there's some later plan and the like, which is wishful thinking. So those sorts of things are really important. On a day-by-day basis, we are granting consents for further development in floodplains in areas that Councillor Newman and Councillor Stewart and others are aware of. So we are doing that on a day-by-day basis. And just recently, we've eliminated or looking to eliminate the Auckland Design Office, which in the central city area has done great work, I would suggest, that goes directly to climate action. But that's being eliminated at a operational level. I understand some time ago a decision was made to relinquish our membership of ICLEI, an international organisation of 1,500 cities, which is the only organisation that exists at an advocacy level on the part of cities and towns and assists us, for example, when we go to Conference of the Parties, COPs, as I did at my expense to the Paris Climate Talks and others, and links us into any number of programs that a myriad of other cities are engaged with. Yes, we're engaged with C40, but as Auckland, we have a unique role because we will be the only city in New Zealand ever able to join C40, I would suggest, because generally it's only open for megacities. So we broker that relationship between the big cities and the small cities, and we as a city have a crucial lead role in New Zealand. So we should be doing everything that we can. And I could list a number of other things. So it is imperative that the seismic shift that you're talking about, Alec, happens much more urgently within the organisation, because if not, we're losing it. And I guess the last thing I would say is we've got a drought through the entire North Island now, and people in my communities and other communities on tank water are effectively being penalised through the policies of water care and the actions of this council. And that also goes to things around resilience. So if we look at ourselves in terms of what we're doing now and what our community sees, we need to be walking the talk. And this is great, but you're going to need a lot more resource through the long-term plan and significant leadership from the Mayor, who will be leading that process to make it happen. And I look forward to that.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. And maybe if I could just have the officers maybe step back from the tables, so we remember debating through the chair or to each other rather than at the officers. Oh no, it wasn't at you, Councillor Walker, but just thought it would be a bit clearer. No, fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they can hear, but I just want to make sure that the presentations happen. Now we debate together, not debate with the officers. Cool. Deputy Chair Coombe.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair. Kia ora koutou. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of the motion. I hope I can keep it to the point. We all know we declared a climate emergency last year, and that the consensus around climate change science is settled. We must act and provide the leadership that's needed. And it really is going to be critical that we start on a pathway to decarbonise urgently over the next 10 years. We've really had a clear direction from the public with support for direction on our targets, making them more assertive, stepping up our adaptation work, and that we're actually acting as if there is an emergency with urgency. And I'm glad that Dr. Hewitson was able to come along and present and support, because him as part of the Waitemata Low Carbon Network, supporting the school strike for climate, that's what they've told us very clearly. And I think this has been a very thorough consultation process, and we've heard overwhelmingly from young people about the need for us to take action and the need for this plan, which I can see is shaping up to be a plan for Auckland. And I do acknowledge that in supporting the direction of this plan, we are going to take more direction from mana whenua. So I thank the IMSB members for bringing that forward with us, and so that when we do land on this plan in July, it's just got huge support around the table. And it is going to be a plan. I'm very keen that we call it Auckland's Climate Plan, because it has to be a plan that is for all Aucklanders, whether in business, iwi, hapu, schools, households, NGOs, government, and we did hear a lot about the importance of partnership, and actually that partnership being framed in real terms, starting with the treaty, and how we bring that through in the plan. And so I do want to particularly commend the direction of this plan, and particularly how it responds for the need for a just transition, and that's something that came through very strongly in the responses, and that it's an equitable outcome as well, because we know that our most vulnerable communities are going to be impacted the most by climate change and are being impacted. And then if we do these actions in this plan, we do radically decarbonise, and I acknowledge Councillor Newman's comments about what does actually radical mean, and I don't think we really can get our heads around just that it is going to be a very different approach to everything we do. There is no more business as usual. It is a very assertive target, and it's going to mean very in-depth changes for everybody. But there is a huge upside: cleaner air, greener streets, less social isolation, more connectivity, a resilient economy, something that is very topical right now as we face a crisis, and that's where the Transition Town movement came from, is that we actually have to transition to a low-carbon lifestyle, because it will make us more resilient to whether it's oil shocks or climate change or natural disasters. It will mean that we'll have stronger communities all around. And also, what I also really commend in this plan too is it means that we will be putting into practice what it means to honour the principles of the treaty, and also to acknowledge Māori knowledge systems. And I look forward to that being embedded into the plan, because I think we're all richer and wiser for that. I know that there's a lot of people when, a good plan has many parents and a successful outcome, and it is too early to celebrate. We're only on the journey. This isn't the plan, but I do just want to acknowledge, where we've come from, and the founders, particularly those who've been talking about climate change for a long time. And I'm glad that we acknowledge Jeanette Fitzsimons today, because she was saying that this is urgent 30 years ago, and people were laughing at her and calling her a wacky greenie. But there's those people who have been very prescient from our forebears, who really did understand the importance of us grappling with climate change. And then more recently in our Auckland Council history, rolling on in the last 10 years, Councillor Walker I would like to acknowledge you as well as the first chair of the Low Carbon Committee that was in first term, and you led the foundation for a lot of this work.
Jeanette's a good friend of mine, or was.
Thank you, Wayne. And Penny Hulse, who led this through into this draft and put a lot of that work, and the huge, amazing team that have been working around this, and Alex's predecessor, John Moreau, as well, and all your team, and I won't start naming everybody, but most importantly, and if I could just wrap up, is just everyone who did submit, hooied, petitioned, raged, protested, advocated and really got us to this point. That's all of Aucklanders who've been engaged in this process. I really do thank them for being part of this democratic process that brings us to this plan. So as I've said, it is too early to congratulate each other, but thank you, Mr. Chair, for your leadership into this term. And I do look forward that we will have those continuing discussions with mana whenua as we shape this into the plan. And I think we're on the right direction. So I really do want to commend this to members. Kia ora, thank you.
Councillor Henderson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I want to speak in enthusiastic support of the plan. So individual actions are great, but we need to move beyond individual action towards structural changes in how we're planning our city and how we're supporting our environment and investing in our transport. And I just want to point out as part of the plan that huge regulatory issues are implicit in all of this, not just in our zoning, but in things like energy conservation, and we have to work with the building industry and things on these points. It's going to require bravery. I really want to support Councillor Newman in public transport to outer communities. I'm really glad you said it, because this is a challenge for us as councillors. If we put on these buses to outer communities and the media picks up how many people are using it, and I saw an empty bus the other day, we need to be brave and we need to respond appropriately. In Piha, we have a community there with about 1,000 people in it. We've got a major tourist attraction that is used by thousands in the summer, and we have no choice but to drive there. There's no choice. If 30 people or so use a bus service all day, that's still 20 cars off the road. That's still emissions reductions, and we need to start thinking about it not just in terms of money, but in how much we're actually reducing our emissions by our policies as well. We have a huge issue around rural footpaths, where we have entire communities in my ward that drive short distances to drop the kids off to school, a couple of 100 metres down the road. That's crazy, and that is carbon emissions going up and up and up. So we need to talk about pricing things and evaluating things, not just in terms of money, but emissions. And I want to support Councillor Casey and her brilliant points as well. The issue for us will be, thank you, yeah, good smile. The issue for us is that the bill is large, but the bank account isn't. That's right. So that's a challenge, and we're going to have some very serious discussions over this term around that. But in discussing the importance of all this, I really do need to raise the situation around our Pacifica whānau, and not just ones that are in Auckland, but across the world. People are losing their homes and losing their communities. My ward has a large Tuvaluan population. Now that's 11,000 people on that island, and it's sinking into the ocean. So we need to remember that we're actually talking about people's lives here when we discuss this. That's how serious we're talking. So I really commend the plan. I think it's great work. Thank you for all your work, and I hope that we can put that into concrete actions.
Thank you. Thank you. Mayor Goff, if you could just switch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And can I just begin by thanking Alec and Sarah, the Sarahs, and Matthew and the team for the huge amount of work that's gone into that. I think we all recognise you're putting your heart and soul into it. Second thing is we're still at a very high level. So we haven't got down to the really difficult decisions. But if we don't set the strategy and we don't set the vision at the level we need to, then we're not doing our job. So that's what you've done to date. Thirdly, will this process be easy or painless? And the answer is a resounding no. Because the question after that is, does it require major change? You can use the word radical if you like. And the answer is absolutely. Because if we're setting out to reduce emissions by 50% by 2030, that is huge. That is life-changing and lifestyle-changing, and none of us should have any thought that it is something other than that. We have set the target at 1.5 degree temperature rise. That's what the international obligation is that has been placed on us. That's what we have accepted. But if the answer is that you do need radical change and it will be painful, the next question is, do you have the choice? And what I say very clearly here is, no, we don't have the choice unless we want to leave a rotten legacy to our kids and our mokopuna. And that's why we need to make the hard decisions now. They won't be easy. And the first question that we had to begin with is what you began the presentation with, was an analysis of the submissions, about 3,000 of them, and a survey of 2,000. Survey really important because it gives us a cross-section. So what did that tell us? It told us in the submissions that over 90% thought that our consultation document took us in the right direction, and it told us that 79% thought that Auckland Council need to play a key role in this. So that, in one sense at least, gives us a mandate. The Colmar-Brunton survey was really interesting because it showed that 3 out of 4 people believe that climate change is human-driven. Trump represents, obviously, the other 25%. 3 out of 4 believe that human action, is that they have a medium or high concern about climate change, and they believe that we need to make medium or radical change. Now, do they understand what the radical change is? Not yet. We need to explain that. And that's why, when I look at the framework, it starts with why. We need to constantly reinforce why we need to make these major changes. You have to look at the drought and you have to look at the sea level rise and you understand what that is, but we need to keep pushing that. You need to set out the what is the next question, and this paper and the presentations we've had set that out. 44%, for example, of our emissions from transport, so we need to change that. We need to have electrification, we need to have mode shift, we need to have a more compact city. And those are the things that we have to push for. Those are critical, and where's the city have a say in that? We also need to look at how we generate, use and conserve energy. We need to look at how we can reduce waste. They are the whats. The critical question now that we face is the how. So we know, and it's set out in the paper that we've received, we need to reduce, we need 33% of the vehicle fleet to have zero emissions. We're not even at 1% yet. So is this going to be hard? You bet it. It is going to be hard. We need to have the bus fleet 100% electric. We control that. But that's going to be not easy, but we should do it. We need to have 40% of our dwellings in transit-oriented developments. We're heading in the right direction, but we've got a way to go. So the how is the next big step and the important step. And the steps after that, or the steps at the same time as that actually, are what's it going to cost and how are we going to pay for it. So, you know, we can give the big speeches around this table, but the crunch point comes when we look at what it's going to cost and how we're going to pay for it. And the final point, Mr. Chair, I want to end on is, are we doing this on our own? No. We have to have critical partnerships. One, we have to show the leadership. We have to tackle the emissions that we create as council, and that's why the annual plan starts off by knocking those emissions by 20%. But we also need to look at the levers, how we influence our communities, individuals and our businesses. And, you know, we had a session yesterday, we talked to the business, what are you doing about climate change? Well, the truth is, at the moment, not a hell of a lot. And they have to be part of the solution, and that has to be by persuasion, or we have to use the levers, whatever levers we might have. But the biggest partnership of all is with central government, because we know that as long as we're, you know, bringing in 65 diesel SUVs for every one electric car, we're not going to come anywhere near achieving the target. So we have to advocate to and support initiatives from the central government. All of this is really bloody hard, but we have to do it. It's probably the biggest challenge that we will face as a council in this term and in our future terms. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. Councillor Casey.
I won't take too long, but I just want to record history that I actually agree with Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Newman and the words he said about the actions that are needed by this council. And they use words like radical, revolutionary, brave and urgent. And I want to hark back to, I don't know if Grant's still here. Grant came before us this morning and said that we need to recognise the emergency. And that is critical. And I think we actually should insert the word emergency into the title of this document. And even when we put in our climate impact statement, it should be climate emergency impact statement. So I wonder if the chair would consider that while I'm talking. Insert the word emergency into the title. So it's Auckland's Climate Emergency Action Framework. Because that's the bit we're not linking up with. Daniel was absolutely right. We are a slow, lumbering beast that travels at glacial speed. We don't do urgent, we don't do brave, we don't do revolutionary, we don't do radical. And I think we need to, if we're going to put this worthy document into action. And so it's a plea for that. And again, I'll hark back to the two examples I gave earlier. Buchanan Street in Glasgow was pedestrianised 48 years ago. And here we had, you can correct me if I get out of line, but here we have Auckland Transport saying it will take them a year to trial something. Ask the Waitemata local board to do it. They'll do it in a couple of months, easily. So I don't get that. And sorry, Chris, you said it's up to us. Well, it is up to us, but we didn't do it. We just accepted that. Just like we're accepting there could be another bus strike, which is my second point. We're only as good as our buses being on the road. I support the Mayor. Absolutely, we need a 100% electric fleet. But we actually need buses on the roads running, whether they're diesel or electric. And if there's a chance that that's not going to happen because Auckland Transport haven't put any money up front, then we should be telling Auckland Transport to shift their money around within their budget to make sure that the drivers we said last December we support fully, that they should have decent working conditions because they're our backbone. And we're just sitting here saying, yeah, okay. Do anybody know there's going to be a strike? Anybody doing anything about it? Well, let's take the action that this kind of policy demands of us. Do it. Ask the questions. If you go down Wellesley, is it Wellesley Street West right now? They've closed the road. People are loving it. They're all saying, when's Queen Street going to be? You love it because you can cross the road over to the town hall without having to wait for half an hour. So it's just that. So thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Christine. It's about taking the actions, not just kind of putting around with the words. Please introduce the word emergency. That just might remind us all that we do have to do it. Sorry, I didn't mean to do all that. And I'm not apologising to Auckland Transport. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Casey. I'm not sure what to do about the adding emergency in. It sort of has come through debate, and I don't want to bring the officers back in, but I'm happy to.
That'd be a good look.
Yeah.
Radical even. Radical.
I mean, if the mood of the room, I mean, but it
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, my only caution is because I'm all fine with the name, but if nothing is changing, then it's just a name. So I want to know maybe through the workshop if that is possible and what that means in a, yeah. So unless we have a show of hands that everyone wants emergency, then we'll just stick it in.
Yeah.
So.
I didn't understand what you said.
Well,
stick in there.
That wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, well, no, because I'm hearing be bold, but
Through the chair, how about we come back to you in the workshop in April? Because you're making a decision in May anyway on it. So you're not going to make a decision now. We'll come back to you around the name because we need to also speak with Mana Whenua as per the recommendations as well. So I would find that helpful to be able to provide you some advice if that's...
Yeah, and as a second, I'd like to just back that up because I think we are going to sign off the whole plan in May, and that's when we can then sign off the name, the actions, the whole document. So this is setting the direction. So I don't think we should all respect to Councillor Casey's, she's got a good point, but there is time for us to work through that.
That's fine.
Yeah, and sorry, I didn't mean to get involved, but it was a question of me. So we will discuss that at the workshop. That naming was not brought up for the 3 workshops we had. So, So it's I'm all up for it, but I want to know what that exactly means, and it's not just words. So there's plenty of time to get it in the final plan. We sign off in May, but I want to discuss that with mana whenua, IMSB, other local boards, things like that. So before we just go and throw a word in. So apologies for getting into the debate. Member Wilson.
Thank you. I'm going to sit here in suppressed excitement, believe it or not, because I think Auckland Council's underestimating the work that they have completed. If I draw a parallel, it's not really a parallel, but in my mind's eye, in terms of 2010, when IMSB came into creation by way of legislation, as opposed to Māori seats, there wasn't the same excitement, there wasn't the same support that was necessarily, but here we sit today. Here we sit in being able to guide this, hopefully, in support of this recommendation. And in my first term here, I would not have been confident that would be. Now, that does take time, and everything takes time. Everything is about lessons learnt. So I'm here in excitement to say you have done well, Council. It can be done a lot quicker, but don't ever believe that always we sit here. That's how I feel sometimes. Things do get done, they just get done mostly by those behind the scenes, which sit right in front of us today. And if we have faith and confidence in their ability to be well directed by us as one, then no doubt, as we have found in this role as IMSB, we will get there a lot quicker. It's when so many pile on top of, we've found in our time, on those that are required to do the work, then what priority is which. So please, we'll all give each other a pat on the back. It can be done. It can be done in a bold way. It doesn't necessarily need to be said, my view of the world. We've committed to it. You've heard the kōrero. We've added our piece that we acknowledge as a lesson learned. That's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Kia ora, Member Wilson. Councillor Darby.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, there is a degree of excitement, and Member Wilson's quite right. And Chair, I'd like to acknowledge you, Councillor Coombe, for grabbing this by the scruff of the neck and bringing it out of the closet, because the door was sort of half closed on this work.
Been out for a little while longer than that.
the work. And acknowledge the team, Alec and Sarah, Matthew, and all those that sit behind. But I also acknowledge the Aucklanders that have responded to this. They've actually framed and polished this up to being a better plan as the teams have responded to those submissions, and it's been some good solid feedback. I'm delighted that we've actually dropped the word framework, and we are actually in some ways back to where we were, but with a lot more muscle on the bones of the skeleton. So now the real challenge in my eyes, and I think this has been addressed today, and is our consequential decisions. What we do from here on in is going to be absolutely critical. And those consequential decisions are going to have to be strong, not puny. And they can't be backaways, and that we can't make decisions and then pack out that decision with a whole lot of greenwashing. And transport and land use are going to be some areas that we're going to have to make some quite different moves in, very, very different. And I link the two because they're inextricably related. And that falls a lot in the remit of the Planning Committee, and Councillor Bartley and myself are determined to lead that work. Our transport emissions are considerable, and that's documented in all the work that's been presented here today. Coming up, we've got an opportunity. It's not an opportunity, we must do it. We're going to refresh the Auckland Transport Alignment Project, and we'll be doing that through a climate lens and a mode shift lens. They're the primary two new drivers of the terms of reference, and we'll get to consider those terms of reference and land that final document. And then that will be followed by the Regional Land Transport Plan and our budget, our 10-year budget. So that's where we get to make those big decisions. And we have got to front those plans with climate action and real climate action. It can't be just a faint narrative. It's got to be that bold desire that I think one of my colleagues has mentioned. Now, I just want to caution going forward, because this has already happened. The New Zealand Transport Upgrade Program Transport, the $12 billion announcement of government, in the south of the city included a 1.3 billion. Now we're talking about how do you pay for it? Here's an example. That was a $1.3 billion expenditure. What we had in ATAP and the RLTP for that corridor, the Mill Road corridor, was a plan for about a $550 million expenditure to do phase 1. We didn't have phase 2 in the plan. There was no political sign-up. It's not in our strategic document. It's in an outer decade, and we advocated through Council and Auckland Transport for this big $1.3 billion. Now, in my view, that is a climate exacerbator, and that is where you don't spend your money. That is a climate exacerbator. This is a road that goes through pretty much a wetland to the east of Papakura and Manurewa and comes out in the very wet Drury. And while you might think, or we might think, that that provides housing, and it might, but my guess is it's in the wrong place. And is it really our priority? And so I'm just testing us here with the decisions that we make. They have to be climate future decisions, and they have to be to plan. We can't operate outside of plan. And those decisions of both the government, having just signed up to the Zero Carbon Act, and ourselves declaring a climate emergency, are contrary to plan and contrary to our own decisions. How we got there on that one and to be supportive of it is beyond me. So you think about what the balance of 550 million to 1.3 could buy you in terms of the transport that Aucklanders really need. It's that transport that reaches into all the suburban places that Councillor Newman refers to. It's considerable. So the urgency that we bring has to be genuine. I probably just want to finish with some words that Fran O'Sullivan, who interviewed Sir Rob Fenwick, drew out of Sir Rob, and these are probably some of his final words. Time is running out for me, and it is with profound sadness that I consider that time is running out too for our precious environment. Sir Rob Fenwick. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Darby. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Cashmore.
Thanks, Richard, and I can recognise you and Pippa and our staff for this work here. It's important. And we're seeing the potential enormity of what climate change could do to our economy. And I recognise what Karen said about we look at it with open eyes, we look at it with calm minds, and we come up with a plan. And you're better off taking a little bit of time to have a workable, practical, deliverable plan than one based on fear and emotion. I would like to challenge what Councillor Darby has just said, because that comes down exactly to the fear and emotion versus the pragmatism. The announcement of the infrastructure package was signalled a term ago in Parliament. The announcement was delayed, and this, what's happening in the south, it's my ward and Councillor Newman's ward and Councillor Dalton's. What's happening down there is a new town has been created. The growth of the existing towns are all doubling. Employment is being created on a scale unprecedented in this city. 17,000 jobs for Drury in the next 5 or 6 years. And with my estimations, with the businesses that I know that are doubling or quadrupling their size, there's another 20 to 30,000 on top of that over the next 20 years. So this is about economies with live, work, play. The misdemeanour that everyone comes into the central city to work is just that. There are more people live and work in the south than in the central isthmus. So that's a reality. And if we're going to base our climate change on realities, let's get the data right. And let's get the facts right. And let's plan for a series of options, because there is not one single answer that's going to change this. There will never be one single answer. We're going to have to feed our population, which is why I gave the question to Alec before about that. You want to import quality food from Indonesia, be my guest. If we're going to retain a vibrant economy, an economy that's also around building a new city, new infrastructure, rail infrastructure, light rail, that needs steel, that needs aggregate. And one of the main reasons for the Mill Road Alternative Highway is that 88% of the aggregate for the city comes from the Franklin Ward. That's a critical factor. So you don't build a city out of theory, and you don't build a city purely out of academia. You build a city with practical, sensible planning, with the realisation that people don't all stay in the same place or work in the same place. There has to be options and opportunities. I'm all for more brownfields. You know, that's a cost-effective way of delivering accommodation and housing. But you still need the opportunity for greenfields and for employment creation of new industries, new technologies, and the increasing capacity of those existing in those areas. So I implore you, Mr. Chairman, to have a rational, sound discussion that is based on delivery, not on emotion. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I acknowledge the leadership from yourself and Deputy Chair Councillor Pippa Coombe regarding pushing this through and all the workshops that we've had to go through, and acknowledging everything that you've done, Alex, Sarah, Matthew, and your team. I also want to acknowledge your consultation by going to where the people are rather than the usual way that consultation has been done these days, or around this table. I mean, in this organisation. It's really good to see the strong response from Māori and Pasifika young people, groups that have been identified as typically disengaged from council engagement. So I think that is pretty awesome. But it's no surprise because globally, Indigenous communities are at the forefront of climate resilience. Which is what I'd like to see more of with this plan, though, is the acknowledgement of Indigenous practices to address climate change. So mana whenua leading the way, as opposed to just being partners. Picking up some comments, or a comment that was made around us leading for the Pacific Islands, they are already leading the way in climate change. In fact, they're doing it faster than we are. So, you know, let's just not think that we know best in some things. I agree with the concerns about socialising the change that we're going to need to make as individuals and as a community in order to achieve the things in this plan. But I really do take my hat off to the young people that are coming through demanding that we do something. Even in the rangatahi feedback we received in the workshop, it was just do it, just get on and do it and figure it out after. I kind of like that, even though it is a little bit emotive. But when you know, I was interviewing over the holidays some young people for our Tamaki Youth Council, and the first thing that was on the top of their mind was climate change. They're all getting active about climate change. I was at a Manawahine event in the weekend about International Women's Day, and the guest speaker there was Ainga Ngale Whili Whepulia i Tapuai of 4TK, For the Culture. And it was all about climate change. You know, all these young people. So I really do admire what's coming from the youth of today. And just acknowledging that Ainga has actually been selected to represent New Zealand at the Global Young Leaders Conference in America. So, yeah, I just really, I don't really want to say excited because I don't really say those things, but it is exciting to see what's coming from the young people. And I know that there's another strike coming up from them about climate change, but it's just awesome to see that this means a lot to them. It means a lot to us, and that we are doing something to kind of address these issues in a good planned way as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Kia ora. I guess for me, I do want to echo some of what Councillor Cashmore said, but come from a different angle. I did raise the question of how radical in one of our workshops. I think I was probably the only one that did. And so for that reason, I think that everybody needs to know what that means, because our young people are enthusiastic, but a lot of it is driven by fear. You can get on and do it, but people really need to know what they might have to give up, what they might have to take up. That is really critical for people to understand. And if we write radical in the title, for me, it's important to get those other 25% of people on board with this. It's really important so that everybody is part of this and everybody can take their share. I mean, my husband is definitely a boomer, and he's just bought his plug-in electric vehicle, hybrid vehicle, and loving it. He'll never go back to an internal combustion engine. However, as we say, we've got to still build those cars and we've got to have roads for those cars. So there's that sort of issue. We want electric vehicles, but they don't run on railway tracks. So we've got to find a balance, and we've got to be able to create a plan that everybody can get on board with. But also, I know, and we've heard, that a lot of the doom and gloom is affecting our young people's mental health, and that really scares me. You know, we need to be leading this as well alongside them so they can feel there's hope and that we are doing something, that they don't have to keep yelling and feel a bit powerless and really scared. That is not a good thing to ramp that up too much, because they are worried, and we have enough youth suicide. So for me, it is about taking it sensibly. Yes, we've got to push the boundaries. We've got to change people's attitudes. We've also got to change people's behaviour, and we're going to help people through some really tough decisions for them and their families. So I do want to know what radical means, and that doesn't mean that I'm signalling that we should ramp anything down, but we need to be really clear and honest with people what that means, rather than just an adjective that rah-rahs people up, because that doesn't do anything. So for me, I'm looking forward to the definitions of what that means, and actually going out to people again and going, well, are you willing? And to also change some of the 25%ers who don't understand and don't believe, but maybe they're just scared of that word radical, and if it was defined for them, that it was doable for them and their families, they may be coming on board. So I really want to acknowledge all the staff, Megan, your staff, everybody that's been involved, and I'm looking forward to the next step. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Watson.
Chair, I think it's kind of warmed up a bit in here since the debate started. I just wanted to very, very quickly say that in respect of all the consideration of, planning regimes and, maybe language choice and policy documentation, all the rest of it, that we don't lose sight that there's people who've got a big head start on us around the world, and that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. I think Councillor Casey alluded to that, and sometimes for countries that, their world leading isn't always in positive areas, often poorly in health. But if you take a country like Scotland, for instance, they had a Climate Change Act in 2009. That's 11 years ago. They set greenhouse gas reduction targets of 80% by the year 2050, with an interim target of 42% reduction by 2020. That's this year, 2020. They're looking for 42% reduction. And council have obligations under that act to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, put in place measures to adapt to changing climate, work in a sustainable way. So they've been doing that for 11 years. But more than that act is what cities like us are actually doing, what they're doing and have been doing for a number of years. Glasgow and Edinburgh are going head to head to see who will become the UK's first net zero city. So they're almost got a competition to see who can do most quickest. Glasgow's got a target well before 2045. Edinburgh, upping them, wants to have it by 2030. That's within a decade. So some of these cities around the world, and there's other ones not just in Scotland, they are really walking the talk, and obviously they've been through the kind of processes that we've been through, and notwithstanding the fact that they're different countries with different geographical determinants, all the rest of it, there's obviously a lot we can learn from them and can get on and do without having to kind of go through the kind of, tortuous introspection that sometimes kind of characterises that, our approach and, and our admittedly rather cumbersome political setup. Let's be honest about things. Similarly, with places like Aberdeen, if you look at their council reporting regimes, big chunks of that are to do with climate change, leading and acting as an example to others through its services, planning, Councillor Newman, so they bring it into their planning, they do it in their planning, and decision making, and reducing emissions from its own estate and services within its influence, including buildings, transport, etc., that we're talking about. So I guess, Mr. Chair, what I'm saying is that we can use the examples of these other cities that are getting out there and doing it. Everyone's talked about action. Some of them are well on their way to attaining these targets, have been doing it for a while. So we actually need to speed up, not take the kind of the time that some people are urging. We need to speed up, pick up on the things we can from these other councils and the way they've done it, and really start getting some momentum on the ground that people will buy into, because I think the feeling is out there in the community, most people have accepted the reality and are ready for some bold action. Not just in the terminology we use, but in things do. I think we're at that threshold now where there are people who say, well, yes, we have to do it. So I think rather than making it a difficulty, I think it's an opportunity for us in particular to be leaders, to bring people with us because they're ready to go. In fact, some of them are way ahead of us. Thank you.
Councillor Filipaina.
It's good that I follow Councillor Watson, because the bold actions that he just mentioned is exactly what I'm repeating here. Through you, Chair, I want to also I want to mention our rangatahi. I remember on the 30th of April last year, I represented His Worship the Mayor and Council at Rua Pōtaka Marae, because they had a rangatahi hui, which was for Māori and Pacific. Now, at Rua Pōtaka Marae, there were two organisations that led our rangatahi hui. That was Pare Kore ki Tāmaki and Te Ohu Mana Rangatahi. And it was awesome to be there. That led them to then come through to here to give a presentation. One of the first that we had was their turtle they brought through that. They then came to a workshop and presented and said, we want to be part of the development of the Climate Change Action Plan, or the framework. And His Worship the Mayor at the time, when it was in our Auckland, said the rangatahi voice was a critical component in developing the Auckland Climate Action Plan. So true. This is why I again, just to reinforce what Councillor Bartley said around our rangatahi, they are so important. So, Chair, realistic? Yes, we have to be. From my perspective, in the setup we have here from a elected members' perspective, that's what we've got, so we have to deal within that. But I did, however, and people talk about whakapapa, that's why I support B in regards to mana whenua and the naming process around this framework. I support that, but whakapapa is also important. And I mean, I take umbrage when I hear that, the door was half shut in regards to this, the framework. No, it wasn't. It's never been half shut. It's always been open. And to acknowledge yourself and to acknowledge Pippa, you've now just walked through the door. I want to acknowledge Councillor Hulse. I want to acknowledge her. Because she took what we started in 2018 and what we ended up declaring, she took that to where we are now, and now it's left in both you and Councillor Coombs' hands. so I acknowledge that. But I do, however, want to acknowledge Councillor Hulse, ex-Councillor Hulse, because that work has now led us to this. So, you know, to say that it was half shut, guess what we did? As through the PowerPoint that was presented, the consultation finished in September, and we only had a minor thing called the election in October. And as a result, we're now in the new governance structure that His Worship the Mayor put in place. So I do acknowledge both yourself and Councillor Coombe. But look, I just needed to say that. I wasn't going to say anything until I heard what I heard. But to our staff, you are going to be the people that will be bringing all the information. You'll be bringing options to us that we, as elected members, Independent Māori Statutory Board, will then have to make the hard decisions. So I look forward to this. I look forward to mana whenua being involved, and especially our rangatahi. Kia ora.
Last speaker before I round it all up, Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. A lot of it's been said, but I was just taking on board what Councillor Darby was talking about with planning. I'm pleased that you're going to be considering planning, and hopefully the unitary plan of some parts of climate change is going to be causing problems. As you're aware, I've been a broken record since 2002 about flooding and stormwater and extreme weather events in my patch. So that's one of the reasons that I think that I can sort of buy into this climate change plan, because of the serious issues that are happening our way. Just listening to what Councillor Cooper was talking about young people with mental health, health issues over climate change. We also have a lot of everybody's suffering out there, and as I said once again, out in my community, and hopefully there's going to be some parts of the unitary plan that might get looked at because of the climate change. We have people out there that are currently living in homes that are not insured and really unlivable. So, you know, I'd love to take you out there to have a look at some of these properties, and you'll get a first-hand view. So really that's all I have to say, but I just want to make sure that I'm all on board with what you have to say, Councillor Darby, on perhaps we might have to change some of the unitary plan. Maybe we haven't got everything right. So thank you for coming on board with that. I appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Whew, okay, that was a fantastic debate. Thank you for all the speakers. It was shows that it's a clear, important issue for all of us. I just want to quickly on the name, and the name I would prefer emergency, but with the discussions I've had with IMSB the last 2 days and their concerns about, and it was my push from a framework to a plan, there was no discussion or consultation with mana whenua on that, and the naming of Te Taruki a Tāwhiri to be matching with that. I'm not going to turn my back on that discussion and add another word in without any discussion with mana whenua, with IMSB, because I've already said I would do that. So I'm not going to just throw it in to make us feel good. I believe we can get there, hopefully by the May committee or the workshop in April, but I would be turning my back on those discussions I've had over the last 2 days, and I just, this is not the way I want to chair committees. It's just saying one thing to mana whenua and our IMSB members and then doing something different to make me feel good. So just put that out there. And I do want to acknowledge mana whenua first on this plan, our IMSB members, our rangatahi, the Kaitiaki Forum, every person from our Mātāwaka community, and the fact we had 25% turnout from Māori in Auckland to this plan is phenomenal, and it's probably one of the highest we've had on any consultation that we've done. But I think that is obvious with the example and the plan that we have in place, because this is what Māori have been telling us from forever, that we have been degrading Papatūānuku, we have been using resources and exhausting them, and we have been poisoning our environment. So, you know, it's clear that we need to be working in partnership on this plan, because they're our key partners on how that we can ensure that this plan is true to restoring our environment and restoring the mauri of the water and the land. And so just putting that out there. The second group of people I want to acknowledge is older people. We do talk about our rangatahi, we do talk about younger people, we do talk about, I marched with 70,000, mostly young people, just before the election down Queen Street. But the older people, the many older people like Sir Rob, like Jeanette Fitzsimons, who have been saying this for a long time, our kaumatua, they're the people who've been leading this discussion, sometimes as the only lone voice, sometimes as the people out there talking about pest strategy, water, about where we should be building things. They are our older people who are still here today and those who have passed on, where this wasn't a discussion that was popular, there wasn't a discussion in the mainstream media. And I thank them for that. I obviously now want to acknowledge our younger people, our rangatahi, who this plan will most affect. If we don't get this right, I was presenting at a school on Saturday on climate change. I was asked to come speak, and one young person said, what if 2050 is too late? What if we are already too late? What do we do then? And to Councillor Cooper's point, I felt like I didn't have enough information or mana behind me to really explain that answer. So I said I didn't know, and I said we would try our best, but there is some fear in younger people's eyes of what the future looks like. So, want to acknowledge younger people for bringing this to the forefront more as collective. I think we called a climate emergency, and we called for the 1.5 target, and that was largely, I believe, to those younger people really pushing us, the Generation Zeros, the School Strike for Climate and others, which really pushed it out there so we couldn't keep saying yes but not acting. I do have down here before Alf spoke around acknowledging Penny and Alf, their work on this a long time before that we had called a climate emergency. The plan itself started in, I think, the end of 2017, and then with the team, the Sustainability Office, have done a lot of work. So I'm kind of jumping in at a exciting time. I feel a lot of work has been done and I don't have to push so hard, but also I'm extremely anxious to get this right, and with the people around this table and the amazing staff we have in council and other people feeding in, that we will get this right, but it's not just up to me, but I feel sort of a heavy burden, but also extreme hope that we can do things and give those opportunities and choices that Councillor Newman and others are speaking about to show people the way, and that it doesn't have to be scary. Because my concern is that if we don't show people the way now, the scary thing is if we do nothing and then we have to all fall off the cliff together because we didn't make action, and the choices, we no longer have choices. The things just start happening. Australia over the summer holidays just keeps happening. What we're seeing now with the drought in Auckland just keeps happening. So there is a cost and there is opportunity, but this is, from my perspective, getting this plan right for the council, but also for the city, will give us the direction that will actually show us for these things we prevent these things from happening, to give us choices. And it's not going to be easy. It's definitely not going to be easy at all. But I think if we work on this together, and a lot of people say, where is business? We need to bring them with us. Business, there's 118 people in the Climate Leaders Coalition, and you can go into every business of the huge number of things they're doing in this way that we probably need to be emulating. I spoke at X Labs a few weeks ago, opened that, and that was 20 businesses from HEB to Fletcher's to a whole lot of other organisations, the Warehouse Group, all working to figure out how they can reduce their waste, how they can act on climate. Everyone wants examples. We can be a leader, but we definitely shouldn't kid ourselves that we are leading and the only people in this conversation. I'll probably leave it there because I could go on a while, but I just thank everyone for the really positive conversations we've had. I feel as a politician, we all say a lot of things but don't do, but I feel that this whole table and all the staff are really doing the do, and working with our other chairs and committees is going to be crucial for this. So I thank you. This is the direction, this is the structure. The next 2 months are crucial to make sure that plan in May is fantastic, meaningful, and it has the actions that actually play a part into reducing emissions and getting to zero emissions by 2050 and halving our emissions by 2030. So exciting, thank you, and I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
We have a division on the vote, please, Chair, if you're proceeding to the vote now.
So I have moved and Councillor Cooper has seconded, and we're going to go for a division on the, we'll take them all together. Thank you.
Division for item 8. Councillor Hills,
Aye, of course.
Councillor Bartley,
For.
Councillor Casey,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore,
Aye.
Councillor Pokum, Councillor Cooper, Councillor Darby,
4.
Mayor Goff, Councillor Filipina, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Mulholland, Councillor Newman, Councillor Sayers, Councillor Simpson, Councillor Stewart, Councillor Walker, Member Wilcox, Member Wilson, Councillor Watson,
Yes.
Councillor Young, carried.
Could I please have that recorded? It was carried unanimously. Thank you. And now I think it's a good time to break for lunch. So thank you very much. We'll be back in just over half an hour. Oh, what time? Could we please be back at 1:10?